1, 2, 3. Witches and wizards of the world! This is the Hogwarts Chaplain coming to you from the Great Hall. Hello, my friends, and happy Sunday! Welcome to the Word and Wizard Network and our special Lent series, the Sunday Sermuncle. I'm sorry I was a few seconds late for our broadcast, walking back and forth 3 times, but you know why I was doing that. You know why I was doing that? Maybe you don't know why I was. Okay, you'll remember the famous and free house elf Dobby was teaching Harry how to enter the room of requirement. And he tells Harry that he has to go to where he thinks the room might be and walk back and forth 3 times and focus on what Harry really needed. That's all anyone has to do to enter the room of requirement. Just focus on what you really need. Not what you want or what you might like, but what you truly need. And the room opens. And it'll open for anyone. Remember, even Argus Filch, who's a squib. He's not even a magical person. But according to the stories, he needed detergent. In any case, my friends, it's a good practice, and Lent is a good time for spiritual practices. So I like to walk back and forth 3 times because I love the number 3. It makes me think of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, the whole person of God. You may have something else you want to think about, like faith, hope, and love, or things like that. In any case, as you do those things, think about what you truly need and speak those things. Let God know what God already knows, but it helps us to say it, because then we figure out more about ourselves and more about the choices we're making and the habits we've formed, good or bad. Quite often, sometimes if you just really ask yourself, what do I really need? It's a way to understand the things that you're doing or the things that you're not doing. So thank you, Dobby, for a great Lenten prayer practice. And thank you, J.K. Rowling, for knitting into your stories lots of things that you don't really call prayer or call spiritual practices, but they definitely are. Now, for the Sunday Sermuncle for today, my friends, very quickly, that the readings are profound this week. And the book, The Order of the Phoenix, and the readings this week have one huge, lots of little, but one huge thing in common. And that is that they are both spoiler alerts, like major spoiler alerts. They have spoilers in them, my friend, for the entire series in which they sit. In The Order of the Phoenix, no, it's not the Deathly Hallows, and there's lots of things that happen after the 870 pages of Order of the Phoenix, the longest book. Yes, there are many things to happen that you wouldn't even guess from the 5th book, but there are the important messages and themes that started in the first few books, and it becomes clear in the 5th book, in the Order of the Phoenix, exactly how this series is going to end. Let me say that again. You learn exactly how this series is going to end. And our readings for this week in Lent, our Bible readings, do the same thing. We're not at Easter yet, and yet if you take seriously what happens and what you hear in the readings for this week, you know exactly how the story of the life of Jesus is going to end. So, very quickly, as for the readings, the first one is from the book of Ezekiel. Some of you know this story very well, others of you, well, welcome if it's your first time. Ezekiel is a good friend of God. He's what you call a prophet, which means he spends time talking to God about things, about himself, about God. And in this particular story, God brings Ezekiel to a valley. Valleys can be pretty happy places with bunnies and birds and bushes. But this valley that Ezekiel goes to with God is full of bones, piles of them. It's like a graveyard without dirt. It's awful, my friends. It's just a place of desolation and death. But God says to Ezekiel, command these bones, prophesy. In other words, talk to these bones. Tell them to get up. And they do. They grow muscles and ligaments and they have breath, because God says to Ezekiel, breathe, and the breath of God, ruach, the breath of God goes to the valley. And notice that God doesn't say, hey, Ezekiel, watch. Look what I'm going to do. He says, hey, Ezekiel, watch. Look what you're going to do. So it's Ezekiel that actually commands with the words of God and then breathes with the breath of God. And Ezekiel becomes part of how this whole valley of bones becomes a valley of resurrected lives. So exciting. And then in the New Testament reading, in the story of Jesus, we have Jesus, and he has a good friend, Lazarus, with 2 sisters. He's known them for years. They are dear to him. But word comes to Jesus while he's traveling away from them that Lazarus is very sick. And Jesus decides he's going to go see Lazarus, but doesn't go right away. And in the days while Jesus continues to teach and preach and heal and do other things, Lazarus dies. And then Jesus finally arrives and his sisters greet Jesus far away from Lazarus' grave and say, he's already dead. And by the way, if you were here, the great healer, he probably wouldn't have died. They're sad, they're angry, they're grieving. What does Jesus say? He asks them what they believe. And Mary and Martha are just standing there, and what you actually hear from Martha, she says, yes, I believe that there is some resurrection at some point, that the grave won't hold him. And you can tell that she's just sad that Lazarus is dead, but she says what her religion is. And then Jesus leaves her and goes to the grave. And to show people that promise that she had heard of, that God through the prophets had made, he decides to make good on that promise on that day. And he says, roll the stone away. And the people say, we can't because it's been 4 days, it'll smell. It's like they know exactly what happened in that valley of dry bones. They don't want to see what Ezekiel saw. They know what dead bones look like and smell like. But Jesus says, no, roll the stone away. So he does. Does this sound like what's going to happen to Jesus? Of course it is. It's a foreshadowing of that, but it's also its own event. And Jesus calls out Lazarus' name and he comes forth. The dead are raised. My friend, talk about a spoiler. Up until that point, and through our other readings in Lent, we've heard stories of Jesus healing people or teaching or feeding or bringing water or bread or wine and changing the world, all these different signs, but we get the ultimate act of God in creation. Not on Easter necessarily, but sooner, like in today's reading, in the first reading and the second reading. We have death, and then we have God breathing and loving and recreating what has been created but has died. Resurrection, my friends. It's all over both readings. It is the great spoiler. So now as we move, those of us who are going through Lent together, as we move toward the last few days and hours of Jesus' life, and there is much pain and betrayal and sadness ahead, we know how that narrative ends. Because we've seen in the readings today that death is not more powerful than God, is not more powerful than love. Resurrection happens, my friend. There are signs all over the world of it, in all the seasons and so many human experiences. Yes, there are visions of death as well, but the resurrection doesn't mean that there is no death. So everywhere you see death, that's not evidence that there isn't resurrection. When you see resurrection, though, there's evidence that all the death that we see and experience in life, in all of its forms of death or disease or illness or brokenness or loneliness, no matter how you meet darkness, no matter what form your dementors take, the readings today say, whether your life feels like a small pile of bones or a valley full of them, love wins. That's what we learn today. And as we go into the end of the readings of Lent, into Holy Week and Easter, we already know how the story ends, my friends. It ends in resurrection. Now, you may say, what does this have to do with the Order of the Phoenix? What is the spoiler in the Order of the Phoenix? Well, notice, my friends, we've been dealing with darkness and evil since the first book of the Harry Potter series. We have in the first book, we meet, actually right off the mark, we meet the Dursleys. And we see immediately that there are some families that are mean, very mean. And then Harry hears that there are good wizards and bad wizards, and he learns about Voldemort and learns that there are some individual wizards who are very mean and dark and evil because they choose it and practice it and promote it. But then you get in the second book and there's the Chamber of Secrets, and there's this basilisk, which is this terrible creature that just seems to want to kill people. But you also realize at the end of the story that creature can be killed with the help of another creature, a good creature, Fawkes the Phoenix. But there's this book that was a normal book until it got infused with dark magic and then became a Horcrux. But then that can be killed, the Horcrux in the book. And that very book, once you put a sock into it and give it to Dobby, can actually free you for life. My friends, it turns a slave into a free elf. So whether it's the sock or whether it's the book, whether it's the basilisk or whether it's the phoenix, you learn in the second book that sometimes evil can be a thing or a beast, but good can be a thing or a beast. Then you get to the Prisoner of Azkaban and you realize that there are dementors. And we all have always known, we just didn't know they had a name. The forms of darkness, that evil that float around you and come inside you. Depression and loneliness and anger and anxiety and fear and sense of failure and inadequacy and insecurities, all of that, all those dementors, they can swarm your life for an hour, for a day, for a decade. And then we learned, though, there's the Patronus charm. So just like evil can be kind of ambient anywhere, you never know where it's going to come from, you always have the power for the Patronus charm. Where if you can just focus on love, a story, a memory of love in your life or in someone else's life. Or maybe you could use something from the scripture, a story of the love that God has for you, from creation, the beginning of the world, or from the love of Jesus. Whatever it is, my friends, you cast your Patronus charm and you can send goodness anywhere, at any time, just like dementors can be anywhere at any time. And then you see in the Goblet of Fire, there's more of this individual that you have to fight and win on your own. But what you find out at the end in that graveyard scene, when Voldemort gets a little bit of Harry's blood and he becomes a person with a body again, and his followers started out with Pettigrew, who'd been his follower all along, and Barty Crouch Jr., who'd also been a follower all along, but they get added by hordes of people now that Voldemort is back. But you know what? Right there in the graveyard, you see that all the people that have loved Harry, the communion of saints, they too can come back. So the story that begins with Triwizard competition of individuals, you begin to realize that by the end of the story, good can have followers, just like darkness and evil can have followers. And we begin the Order of the Phoenix. Remember, order, the word order? You know that the 5th book is going to be about how evil works in groups, in systems. So the whole ministry for magic can become corrupt. And even Hogwarts, when you remove Hagrid for half the year and Dumbledore for the other half of the year, and you have someone like Dolores Umbridge taking over, and you realize corruption can take over even a place like Hogwarts. And even Harry's own life. Let's back up for a second. So you have the fact that Hogwarts and other systems can become evil, but then you have the Order of the Phoenix and Dumbledore's army to show you systems can also be good. But in the middle, as I was about to say, is we have Harry. In Harry's own body, you begin to realize that evil isn't just people, isn't just places, isn't just things, isn't just beasts, and isn't just systems, but it's actually in you. Yes, sadly, Harry is haunted from the beginning of Order of the Phoenix all the way to the end in a kind of crescendo of feeling more and more Voldemort's darkness and evil actually growing inside him. He tells Sirius, his godfather, that he feels like Voldemort is inside of him and that Harry's becoming more like Voldemort. You begin to realize, sadly, by the 5th book, that the hardest evil to fight, my friends, is sometimes within you. It is a form of death. We all will face death. That is the reality that comes out in the Order of the Phoenix. You can't escape death. All things that live die. Sigmund Freud, an old German muggle, once said that although he could explain, he believed through science, he could explain religion or explain away religion and the faith of people as just wishful thinking or psychosis or hysteria, he said though he'd explained to his own knowledge how religion worked and why it worked, he still said, I am haunted by the painful riddle of death. He confessed that even though he shouldn't feel anything about death necessarily, because we're just sort of atoms or material beings or animals, but he said he hated death. He was mad about death. He was mad when people died. Something about death struck him as scandalous, and he knew that his own system couldn't really explain that. Why did he feel like he was robbed? He admitted something that maybe all of us have felt. A painful riddle of death. No matter what you believe or don't believe, my friends, there's something about death that strikes you as not the way things are supposed to be. And Freud knew, according to his philosophy, things aren't supposed to be like anything. There's no supposed to. There's no what should be. There's just what is. And yet he longed that life would exist without death. All of us do. And Harry in this story realizes that this thing, this reality that he will die, that everyone he loves will die, it's weighing on him like a Horcrux. But my friends, what do you see at the end of Order of the Phoenix? Voldemort more and more has been filling Harry's mind, and they've been trying to get Snape to train Harry to keep Voldemort out. But the truth is, death is taking over in Harry's mind, and it's a symbol for all of us. But in that last scene when Voldemort starts fighting Harry, and then Dumbledore shows up, and there's this epic battle in the Ministry between Dumbledore and Voldemort, Voldemort tries to get inside Harry's own body, to take over Harry, either to kill him or to have Dumbledore kill Harry once he thinks Voldemort is inside Harry. He tries to take him over completely to finish what he's been doing from the beginning of the series. And what happens? Harry focuses on love, on what makes him different than Voldemort, which is his love and his friendship. And he sees images and feels feelings of embraces and tears and laughter, of being accepted and redeemed by those around him. And that love is so strong inside Harry. You remember this part of the story. It literally expels Voldemort out of him. Death is not more powerful than the love that Harry has inside him. My friends, that's the great spoiler of the whole series. Voldemort gets inside of Harry. He wants the death and darkness that he brings to take over and destroy the love in Harry's heart and life. The love that's been shown for him and the love that Harry shows for everyone. And it fails. Death dies again. Voldemort is expelled from Harry. And Harry even says, as Voldemort leaves him, I feel sorry for you. You will not know love and friendship. I feel sorry for you. Love wins. It's only the 5th book, my friends, but the spoiler happens. What remains, just like a few more weeks of our series, here and in your Lenten readings, you will see that there is more of the life of Jesus and the life of Harry Potter that has to play out. Very real things, very real relationships and pain and loss and war and blood. But all through that, remember what we learned in the readings today and in the Order of the Phoenix this week. What we learned is that when death takes on life, when death threatens love, resurrection happens, death dies, and love wins.